Hi everyone, I'm Neha, and today we have a very special guest, Julia Landauer. Julia is a two times champion race car driver and STEM advocate who graduated from Stanford University with a degree in science, technology, and society. Julia has broken many records by being the youngest female champion in the Skip Barber Racing Series, being the first woman to win a NASCAR track championship at Motor Mile Speedway in her division in 2015, and being the first woman to lead a lap in the Canadian NASCAR Pinty Series in 2019. So, without further ado, if you couldn't already tell, I'm extremely excited to be interviewing Julia. So, hi, Julia. How are you today?
Hello, I'm great. Thank you for having me. And I'm not sure anyone else has done such a perfect introduction, like so quickly. Like you sound very New
Thank you.
Yorker for me, so it's very
New
exciting.
York. Thank you. Okay, so first thing I wanted to just jump right into was let's just start with your career in racing. Where did that journey with race car driving begin, and how'd you get into it?
Yeah, so my parents had actually been looking for an activity that me and my younger sister and brother could do as a family. And I think they wanted something that was hands-on. They wanted something where they could be involved. And I think my dad wanted to race go-karts when he was little and wasn't allowed to, but they
Mm-hmm.
decided like let's get into competitive go-karting. And
Mm-hmm.
so the first year when I was 10, it was me and my sister, and then my brother joined the next year, and we raced so many weekends out of the year, and it was Sunday racing, and the track was about 2 hours outside of New York City where I'm from. And yeah, we started doing it, and I loved it. I loved being competitive. I loved the speed. I loved the strategy and the puzzle of putting
Mm-hmm.
together a perfect lap, and then I loved winning once I started
That's
doing that. So
that's incredible. Did you do any other sports or was it just race car driving that you just learned to love, I guess?
yeah, so I didn't do any other sports
Mm-hmm.
competitively. Like in school, we did sports during gym. So like I really liked field hockey when we did
Mm-hmm.
that. But I didn't feel like I was built for many other sports. I've always liked running, and I've liked running as a form of exercise, but
Mm-hmm.
no, only racing.
That's cool. So how did your racing career skyrocket? Like, how'd you know that you wanted to do it as a career and like professionally, I guess?
Great question. Again, I was so young, and so I was working with my parents for a lot of, the next steps at every point in my career.
Mhm.
And, I knew that I was happiest at the racetrack. I knew that I kind of felt most proud of myself at the racetrack. My pick racing really picked up when I was in middle school, and I really didn't have a great time in middle school. Like it's a tough
Mhm.
time for everyone, and mean
Yeah.
girls were a real thing. And so I felt pretty insecure and shy at school. And
Mhm.
so the racetrack was kind of this outlet where I could go kick butt and,
Mhm.
beat these guys. And it was just like a huge
Mhm.
confidence boost. So then we found my dad was reading a racing magazine and saw that a kid who was 12 years old had gotten into a racing series, that Skip Barber
Mhm.
Racing Series. And he was like, well, if this kid can do it, my kid can do it. And so
Mhm.
they helped me get involved, but that was kind of what led me. And then when I won the championship when I was 14, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm a 14-year-old girl who's beating all these
Yeah.
full grown men. Like, I can do this.
That's
So,
crazy. Yeah,
yeah.
that's really impressive.
Thank
So, I
you.
guess when did you start getting into like STEM too? Was it during the your childhood as well, like alongside racing, or was that more of like a college thing, I guess?
Well, I think that the STEM element was maybe even like subconsciously involved
Mhm.
early on. Like when I look back, I really loved that I was this like scrawny kid that was maneuvering a machine, right? Like
Mhm.
the fact that racing is this human machine interaction. I didn't know the term human machine interaction,
Mhm.
but like that's what it was. And so that was something that was really cool. On top of that, especially when I was racing cars, so I was like in my later teenage years, I there are a lot of stereotypes against women, and there are a
Mhm.
lot of stereotypes against women drivers. And I found that, and I thought that I would up my chances of getting respect from teams and to be taken seriously if I had some technical knowledge about the car, and if I could contribute to the setup of the car, or at least
Mhm.
be able to follow along with the technical literacy. So that was part of it. I wouldn't say like in school I was not great at a lot of
Mhm.
math and technical classes, but I really like the problem solving aspect. I like the logic. And so,
Mhm.
one side note is that even if you don't feel like you thrive at a subject, there are still a
Mhm.
lot of benefits to doing that subject. And
Yeah.
so like, yeah. So again,
Mhm.
never considered going into a technical field in
Mhm.
that capacity, but really felt that I was empowering myself with more technical knowledge.
Mhm. That's really cool. So, and earlier on in your career, did you ever like struggle with trying to become like good, like competitively at racing, or was it something you just kind of felt came to you kind of like it was a more of a skill that you already kind of had, or did you really have to work for it, I guess?
That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever posed that question to me like that before. So congratulations on that. So a little bit of both. So I
Hmm.
think that there are certain innate traits and qualities that people have that make them a good racer. You know, the
Hmm.
ability to capitalize on an opportunity and to see, like, have the guts to go for the open space or whatever it might
Hmm.
be. Reaction times, you know, the competitive factor, the
Hmm.
all that. But then a lot of the other stuff is stuff that you can train. You know, how do you get faster? How do you improve your communication and
Hmm.
feedback to your team? So for me, you know, I don't think that I ever showed up at a new racetrack or showed up in a new type of car and absolutely blew everyone out of the water initially.
Hmm.
I was much more of a driver that I started somewhere and I was probably a little more conservative when I started. And then I've always pragmatically built up and like
Hmm.
got consistently faster and faster and faster. And, you know, there are pros and cons to both styles of driving. You
Hmm.
know, I was much less likely to go bonsai, make a stupid mistake that could crash the car. But I
Hmm.
also might not get as fast as quickly. And so I think, you know, for my style, it was just more of that building towards it.
Hmm.
So yeah, a little bit of both. I've always had to work hard.
Yeah.
But then, you know, with the right circumstances and,
Hmm.
you know, so much of doing well in racing is the quality of your equipment, the quality of
Yeah.
the people working on it. It's even though it's an individual driving sport, it is very much a team sport in making it happen. And so when all that stuff is good, it's a
Hmm.
lot easier to be really fast and
Yeah,
competitive.
totally. So what's unique about like race car driving that stood out to you, like comparatively to like other activities you might have done, that you just knew you loved like so much? I guess it's similar to the other question I asked you, but I guess, yeah.
Yeah, no, there's
What's that
more.
unique?
There's
Mm-hmm.
more that I can add. I really loved. I think I mentioned it earlier, kind of the puzzle aspect, and
Mm-hmm.
it's this idea that you know you have to make sure the equipment is as good as possible. The team has to
Mm-hmm.
be as good as possible. You have to be as good as possible.
Yeah.
You need to have luck. You can't have a mechanical failure. You need other people to not take you out and crash you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's almost like so hard to win in racing, and it's such an
Mm-hmm.
emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
And I love that emotional roller coaster, even though it's exhausting. But when you do win, it is like the most intoxicating feeling in the world because you've
Mm-hmm.
just proven that you're the best. And for context, like Jeff Gordon is considered one of the best NASCAR drivers at all time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his win rate is something like 15%. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like a very winning driver. And so just to give some context as to how hard it is to win and how
Yeah.
unlikely it is to win when you're racing against 30 something other
Mm-hmm.
drivers, it's pretty great when it happens.
That's really cool. So do you really enjoy the team aspect of like race car driving, or do you like more that it's more of a hands-on individual type of activity for you to kind of excel at, I guess?
So when the team is good, I love the team
Yeah.
aspect. And
Uh-huh.
I say good, I don't just mean in performance. I mean when all of the crew members are respectful, when everyone's
Mhm.
working together. And I think, you know, there are times when I've had to work really hard to get the respect of a team. There are times
Mhm.
when I feel like sometimes the team doesn't always care how they did, but when the team's working well and we have that collaborative aspect and we're helping to make each other better and we're pushing each other and challenging each other, whether that's you know the team owner overseeing everyone or if it's my spotter who they stand in the grandstands or up high to try to help make sure we don't hit anything since we have
Mhm.
limited visibility
Oh yeah. Mhm.
and they kind of help convey information from the officials and everything.
Mhm.
So those spotters, you know, the relationship with them is really important. And when you get something that's working well, it is so cool to then be able to celebrate all of that together.
Yeah.
So and then you know, assuming the team does their stuff well, what I've always liked about racing is that you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to me. If I mess up on track, it's clear that it's my fault, right? Like, and so taking that responsibility and that ownership um, was really empowering. And I remember watching other sports sometimes I'm like, oh, if my team member had messed up and that cost us the win, like I'd be so upset. There's some
Yeah.
element of that in racing, but I
Mhm.
did like that it kind of comes down, assuming the car is running well, it comes down to the
Yeah.
driver.
Mhm. Yeah. So how did you initially navigate like the male dominated like aspect of racing? And is that tactic similar to like, how you approach like the male dominated field of STEM? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's always an interesting question because I'm only used to being a woman in a male dominated field, and
Hmm.
I've been used to it for so long in racing. And so I feel like I've been able to compartmentalize. And there were definitely times, especially as a teenager, where I didn't feel like I didn't belong, but I felt like I didn't have a ton of friends at the track, or I didn't have a lot of people that were relatable. And as I got older, and especially as my parents weren't at the track anymore, because when your parents are there with you, I think people are, for the most part, pretty well behaved around you. But what I found was that when my parents weren't there, I saw kind of more, some more sexist jokes or some more, stuff that I didn't love. And so I had to kind of figure out how to navigate talking with the team if they were doing stuff that was making me uncomfortable. And that was really uncomfortable, but worthwhile at the end, because a lot of times people didn't quite realize how what they were saying was impacting me. So it's super hard. Like, I think it's always hard to be the other person in any
Yeah.
situation. And I think I've had a decently okay experience, but it's always tough. And I'm really happy to see more and more women talking about their experiences, not only in racing, but in other industries, so
Mhm.
that like younger people like yourself coming up, like hopefully don't feel as alone if you are going through something like it.
Yeah. So did you have to like learn to love being like alone or independent almost, or did you kind of have to learn to like be okay with those experiences and try to handle them more directly, I guess?
I did have to learn how to become okay handling like confrontation. I think I'm fairly
Yeah.
confrontation averse. And
Mhm.
but at the end, like I would basically just have to really rationally remind myself, like, if I'm uncomfortable in my team setting, then I'm not going to perform as well. And so this is like, if I want to be a winner, I got to
Mhm.
figure this out.
Yeah.
In terms of being alone, I love being alone, so I
Mhm.
really don't mind.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but that other part was something I had to work on.
Mhm. And were you ever able to find like a community of other like female drivers that you were able to find comfort in?
Much more so in my later years in racing. When I
Mhm.
started racing, there really weren't a lot of women. I think there
Mhm.
were more and more. I've always had mentors. So Lynn St. James is a woman who, she's long retired, but she raced in IndyCar and in sports cars. And so I met her when I was 13. So I had this kind of like iconic woman
Mhm.
who had my back and who could share her experiences from like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Um, and then as I've gotten older, I've really tried to not necessarily be friends with all the other women, because I think that's not excuse me,
Mhm.
realistic that you'll always be friends just because you're women, but to be respectful and to cheer on people when
Mhm.
they're doing good stuff. And I definitely have plenty of women who are racers, and we're all kind of leaning on each other or ask for help, and so that's
Mhm.
really cool.
That's cool, yeah. So did you ever like because you didn't really have that community in your earlier years, did that ever discourage you from the field of racing? Or you kind of just were able to stick through it and realize that, you were doing it for your love of racing, I guess.
Yeah, more the latter. I never felt discouraged from racing because of being a woman and being
Mhm.
outnumbered
Yeah.
and or feeling alone. Like, the craft itself was so important to me, and my belief in myself. And you know, I feel very lucky. I had a very supportive family and my siblings and my best friends and everything. So like I knew that I was great, and so I knew that I could be great, and
Mhm.
so that was enough for me. But yeah, good question.
Thanks. So let's move on to your, I guess, your experience at Stanford. How was that experience, and why did you decide to get that degree in specifically science, technology, and society?
Yeah, I love going to school. I love Stanford. I really appreciated how interdisciplinary so much of it was, and especially because I raced throughout college, like during the summers primarily, and like I knew that when I graduated, I was going to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, to
Mhm.
pursue racing. So with that in mind, I knew that I didn't want to focus on a major that was really singularly disciplinary, or like go deep into one
Yeah.
subject. I wanted to learn about as much as possible, and there were a bunch of different majors that facilitated that. And I declared very last minute what I was going to do because I didn't know what I wanted. But what I liked with STS, Science, Technology, and Society, was that they had a bunch of different tracks, and you could make it as kind of tech heavy as you wanted. And all of the majors required that kind of tech track in some capacity, but it allowed me to also take communication classes and, fun electives like a graphic novel course about like cartoons and images and words. And I really liked just dabbling in a lot of different subjects. And there were some that I really didn't do well at. There was a history class that I totally bombed. There was a photography class that I wanted to do it for the photography, but it was also primarily an optics class. And so it was very technical. And let me tell you, I did not thrive. I passed, but I did not thrive. It's important to know which classes you want to declare as just pass fail instead of the actual grade. Pro tip right there. And but yeah, no, I loved it. And I really loved that I felt very comfortable reaching out to a lot of different faculty. And just going to office hours and just their office hours, even if they weren't my teachers, and just asking them stuff. So like I've always been interested in how motorsports can be more sustainable and environmentally friendly, not just the racing, but like the whole industry. And like I talked with a sustainability professor, and she just gave me a half hour of her time. And so really leveraging that was really important because one, I got used to talking with older people and being respectful of their time. And then I also just got to learn about a lot of stuff.
That's really cool. So what made you love like the Stanford atmosphere, I guess? Like how was that different from your schooling previously? Why'd you love that and like that campus, the environment, the school activities?
Well, Northern California is beautiful. And again, I grew up in New York. I went to high school in New York, and I don't really remember why I initially wanted to go to Stanford, but I just remember always having that be my first choice. And again, I loved it. I loved that it was in California. I kind of loved that it was far away from home. Like I'm very close with my family, and I love that. And like my siblings and I FaceTime every week still, but it was nice to kind of get a little distance. And I will say, like, I was lucky in that my parents paid for my college. So I recognize that is a luxury that not everyone has, and it allowed me to kind of go where I wanted to. But again, with the atmosphere, like I loved that the campus was kind of isolated. And also, I'm going to pause right quick. Is my internet a little spotty for you?
No,
Or is
I'm
it
able to
okay?
hear. Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, perfect. So let me pick that back up again. So I loved that the campus was isolated from kind of, or like its own campus, and a lot of people stayed on campus. So you really felt like you were this family. I loved how much outdoor stuff there was to do. Like, again, I really like running. And so there were so many places around campus that you could run, and, up the hills and down the hills. And I really liked how driven everyone was. I didn't particularly want a party school. So for me, people definitely have fun at Stanford, but it wasn't like just rage all the time. So yeah, it was pretty special.
That's cool. So how was your life after Stanford? Like what kind of things did you do? And yeah.
Yeah. So when I graduated in June of 2014, I then moved to North Carolina, and I didn't know anybody here. I knew racing was here, but I kind of had to navigate like what part of the Charlotte area do people live in? Like I got used to the culture, and it was a big culture shock going from New York City to the Bay Area to the South. And so I was racing a lot. And then also out of college was when I started, because I had given a TEDx talk my senior year of college. I knew that racing was going to require a ton of work. I knew that I was going to have to work really hard on sponsorship sales and brand development and everything. But I also knew that I was going to have to pay my bills. And so for me, I kind of sat down and thought, okay, what would allow me to have that freedom to pursue the racing? And I knew that public speaking could be a career. I knew I had a very polished TEDx video, so I had proof that I was a good speaker. And I about the fall after I graduated, I started, pitching myself to speaking conferences, and that was kind of the start of building up my keynote speaking career. And so I did that. I raced. And that was kind of my life for many years. Yeah.
What's your life looking like now?
Life, we're 9 years into living here, and my racing has slowed down a little bit. It's a very expensive sport.
Yeah.
Sponsorship is very hard to come by.
Mhm.
And so I love racing. I know that I will race again. I don't know what that looks like now. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
my sponsor that I had for the beginning of the year fell through last minute. So it was really tough.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I'm speaking. I have a podcast also called
Yeah.
If I'm Honest with Julia Landauer, where I talk about kind of more of these specific experiences. So
Mhm.
kudos to all the podcasters out there because it
Yeah.
is so much work. And I do my own editing also.
That's cool.
Uh,
Yeah.
but it's fun. And I continue speaking and doing brand partnerships and, you know, kind of figuring out what's next.
Yeah, definitely. So, actually, piggybacking off of that podcast, what made you want to start the If I'm Honest podcast, and what things do you aim to discuss and achieve with it, I guess?
Yeah, so I've been public speaking for 8 years now, right? And so at the beginning of this year, I just had a lot of people who were attendees who were saying, like, oh, this is so great. Like, can I get more information anywhere? And I wasn't really using social media to push content because for me, the business model wasn't quite there. And like, I feel somewhat protective and like careful with the content I put out. And I didn't feel like I could convey the same way with just a text form. And so I was talking with my agent about how do we expand speaking? How do we take like what's helpful and funny content that I give on stage, and then how do I give it to more people? And so that was the original idea for the podcast, to have little 20-minute episodes where I do a deep dive into another subject. So I have 10 episodes out now,
Mhm.
and it's a mix of things like I jump into always asking for what you want and like pushing yourself to ask the question. And I tell my own personal stories. I talk about how Taylor Swift taught me to know my value financially with some of the stuff that she did. And then I give advice to other people. And I'm starting to incorporate guests, so that's
Mhm.
fun. We just had our
Cool.
first guest episode recently, and but yeah, the goal is to do a deep dive on a subject, and it'll vary. I'm currently working on one about building healthy relationships with like non-romantic
Mhm.
friends or coworkers or things, and just my experiences and things that I hope are helpful. I'm
Yeah.
very raw. I'm very honest, and it's been really cool. It's a little therapeutic for me
Yeah.
too, to just kind of talk.
Kind of
And
venting.
yeah, so I'm hoping to grow it. And I really hope it's really targeted towards people who are working on themselves and are trying to live their best lives and kind of want to think introspectively about what they're doing. And I think that would be the real target audience for it. And then
Yeah.
hopefully it's if it helps one person, then it's worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. So, moving over to some of your motivational speeches, I watched your TED Talk about fear and was really,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I was really intrigued by your message. So, you said you were able to harness that fear into like motivation or endorphins like before each of your races. But has that fear or of failure ever gotten the best of you? Like, has it ever kind of not been in that form of endorphins, whether it was like on the racetrack or in the form of different parts of your life, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so there have definitely been failures, like so many failures. But I think when it comes to fears, I think most of what we do, if we set a big goal, it's going to be a little scary, right? And so I think the biggest thing that has hurt me is when I kind of want to do something, but I'm a little afraid, and then I don't like commit fully. I kind of hold back a little bit, and then I don't give my full capacity to whatever it is that I'm doing. So specific examples are a little hard to think of off the top of my head, but um, I think the biggest thing when thinking about things you've done or things you want to do is if there's a moment that you wish you had done something else, or a moment where something didn't work out, I do think it's really important to be really self-critical about anything you could have done differently. Could you have prepared more? Could you have worked a little harder? Could you have done more outreach? And once you decide yes or no and think about how you'll change for the future, I think it's really important to like forgive yourself and then move on, right?
Yeah.
You can't do anything about what's happened. And this is easier said than done, but it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you ever feel pressured, like really pressured to do the best or do the most and be the best, I guess?
All the time. I
Yeah.
feel pressure, especially whenever it was racing, like I always felt pressure. I always felt because partially because I want to be the best that I can,
Yeah.
partially because so many people have helped me so much. And so it's like living up to their expectations. I don't want to say that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way.
But
Like,
like repaying them in a way.
kind of like making their investment worthwhile. And, throughout growing up, especially since I was young with racing, my parents every year asked, like, do you still want to do this? Do
Mhm.
you still want to work this hard? Because if we're going to work this hard for you, you need to be working just as hard, if not more. So that, is stuff that I've done. But then and then there's other pressure, like even getting on stage for a keynote. Like I'm very good at it at this point, but I still worry ahead of time. Like, is the audience gonna like this message? Are they gonna find things that are valuable? And I don't want to waste anyone else's time because I don't like my time being wasted. And so, wanting to make sure that it's valuable. So there's definitely pressure, but I think there's always the release after that pressure. Like once you do it, it's done. And, either you can do it the best you can, or maybe you didn't and you'll adjust for next time. But either way, you'll get through it. And I think that's important to remember when feeling pressure.
Definitely. So, what are some of your future goals when it comes to like racing, STEM, your life, I guess? Yeah.
Oh, good question. So I think kind of conceptually, I really like building. I really like creating. I love storytelling. And so I'm hoping that I can continue to do those things, whatever they might be. I love the sport of racing, and so maybe there's more involvement there, whether it's helping more women get involved or something else in the sport. But the goal, I think, and what I've realized as I've gotten older is like in terms of how I want to live my life is to be proud of myself as often as I can be. And that means working hard, doing challenging things, dealing with pressure. Like feeling proud of yourself is really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not being afraid to feel powerful or to feel proud and to like be in those feelings. So being proud is really important. Being present, and I know a lot of people talk about it, but enjoying the little things and being present and building relationships with people. And then hopefully, yeah, building and leaving some kind of legacy. And I don't know what that looks like exactly, but continuing to contribute to the world and hoping to make it better in some way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, what is a piece of advice that you would give to other girls learning to either just navigate the male-dominated fields of STEM or racing or really anything else?
I'm going to share my favorite quote for the longest time now, and it's from a woman who I saw on Pinterest, and now we're Instagram friends, Arada Svetlana. And she said, if it's both terrifying and amazing, then you should definitely pursue it. And I love this idea of acknowledging that things can be really scary or really challenging. But if there's any part of positivity in there, if there's anything that's exciting or anything that will be beneficial to you, like you should do it. We owe it to ourselves to try. And I think that helps us level up in like however leveling up looks to you, but it just helps us level up. And I think that's when we live really great lives. So, yeah.
Definitely. So, okay, thank you so much for being here and answering these questions for Wired Up. It's really such an honor to have you speak about your experiences and learn about your journey. You're really such an accomplished individual, and it's really inspirational. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for excellent questions. I mean that. These were really
Thank you.
good.
I
So
mean, you're
kudos
like an
to you.
excellent person, so it shouldn't be that hard,
Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness. Love it. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.